Hey everyone, thanks for coming along. I'm recording my camera only. Um, I'm gonna, as this is the first one that I'm recording, I'm gonna sort of do a recap over the last few weeks so that everyone can pretty much get to grips with where we are at. Um, and to be honest, most of this stuff is really simple, or the theory of it is very simple. Um, the mind tends to make it a lot more complicated than it actually is. But yeah, we're sort of trying to let go of creating more and more concepts and making things more and more complicated because that hasn't really got us anywhere in particular so far. I'll probably edit out some of the longer questions and so on, but just so you know, most of the sessions are about an hour and um, I sort of take quite a few questions at varying points. So let's start with quite a long recap and try and get this vaguely clear for everybody. So first of all, as a basis and a foundation for what we're doing, I set up this working theory that all we really want is to be happy. Or you don't have to use the word happiness, not everybody resonates with that word, but maybe you might say we want to be at peace or we want to feel contented or still, or whatever it is that resonates with you. You know what it is that drives you to do everything in your life that you do. And behind all of the superficial reasons, there's a much deeper reason for everything you do in life. Um, Basically, all of our lives are built around trying to create the conditions for that happiness or peace or whatever to be more prevalent and to exist for us because we like it. Um, we do what we do because we want to be happy or peaceful, and so does everyone else. Nobody wants to be unhappy. Um, Even if they draw some peace from being a martyr, for example, or from their own suffering, or even if they are like an ascetic, an ascetic does all sorts of challenging sort of things to the body, for example, or withdraws from society and can lead to what seems to be quite a, hard life. Even those people choose to suffer because in some way it brings them happiness. It brings them the contentedness or the peace that they are craving. So I don't think anybody actually leads their life wanting to be unhappy, even if they think they want to be unhappy as some sort of punishment for what they've done or redemption and so on. It's even if you want punishment for what you've done, it's still because you want to appease, for example, your guilt or to feel like you have, you know, atoned for your sins. There's still happiness and peace tied up in those actions. I'm not suggesting you have to agree with me, but personally, I don't believe that anybody steers their life trying to be unhappy, whatever that looks like, sort of outwardly. And we've talked about, and we'll go over now, how all of our efforts to derive happiness or peace from things, and I'll explain that in a minute, haven't seemed to pay off. Um, so we might experience temporary moments of peace, and we will have experienced temporary moments of peace in our life, or a certain degree of happiness, but it never seems to truly last. And it's certainly, in my experience, any time that I've desired things, be they physical things like a new car, a pair of trainers, or whatever, or whether they are metaphysical things like thoughts that I keep pursuing or planning that I pursue to try and sort of alleviate my anxiety or worry or fears. Um, Whenever I invest myself in this desire for things, chasing things, the happiness or the peace that results from it is never truly a deep and lasting peace. Not in my experience. And I've never met anybody else who said that in their experience they've found this thing that has given them lasting peace. Um, the things that we're focusing on, that we're focusing our craving, our desire on, are all objective experiences. Even if that is the desire to get rid of something, it will still be a thing, a thought, a person, or an annoyance that we desire to be gone. Um, and that thing, thought, person, or annoyance is still an objective experience. It still has objective qualities. Like I see it in a certain way, I perceive it in a certain way as good, bad, neutral, or whatever. And at this point, in our lives, we probably wouldn't be here if we thought that we could find happiness and contentment in external things, because we've tried it. We've tried looking for these things and searching for them for our whole life. It hasn't worked. So most of us are now turning to something else. We're turning our search somewhere else. So what's very useful at this point is to understand that all of the things that we have pursued so far, all of the things we've desired that we think will make us happy or remove our unhappiness, have two qualities. If we can be familiar with those qualities, we will hopefully stop falling into the same pattern of chasing these things. So, the first quality is that things are impermanent and changing by their nature. Be that a tree, a human body, or a mind full of thoughts, all of those things are constantly changing. If it's a tree, we might look at it, it might appear to be the same, for example, but it's not. Just atomically, physically, but even like our connection to the tree, depending on what our mood's like, even the light on the tree or the wind on the tree, and just casting it in a sort of different way and giving a different impression. Everything is impermanent. It will eventually decay and disappear. Nothing lasts forever. No thing lasts forever. The second quality of things is that things only have a relative existence. And in other words, things don't stand alone by their own light. So we perceive a pen to be a pen, and we perceive it as certain uses, for example. If that washed up on a beach and was found by a tribe of people that had no writing and had never seen a pen on paper before, they would be completely baffled what this thing was for, and they might find a totally different use for it. It simply wouldn't be a pen to that tribe. It would be whatever they adapted it to. Certainly wouldn't be a pen to a dog, for example, or a cat, or a wasp. It's just something that, but because of our conditioned perceptions, to us it is a pen, and we don't ever question that at all. It's not only physical objects that we do that with. We do that with all sorts of concepts. So like Monday morning, we wake up and we think, oh, it's Monday morning. And we think Monday morning has a certain feel about it. Monday morning has certain qualities that we believe are inherently connected to it. Monday morning feels like this. Whereas, Saturday morning, I haven't got to go to work. Saturday morning feels completely different. I feel really good. Saturday morning has some happiness bound up in it somehow. And Monday morning has some sort of gloom bound up in it somehow. Maybe I've got to go back to work. But when we stop assuming everything and just, taking our assumptions to be true, we start to see that actually this is complete madness. There is no such thing as Monday morning. There never has been such a thing as Monday morning, because there's never been such a thing as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. There is a continuum of the sun rising and the sun setting, but there is no such thing as Monday that has certain qualities connected to it. Monday can't make us feel happy or unhappy in any way, because Monday doesn't exist in that way. Monday doesn't know itself as Monday. It's not like in 7 days there will be another Monday like this Monday. There's just an infinite continuum of endless days. They don't really go in cycles of 7. Now, we all know that, like logically, but the problem is we forget it and we just make these assumptions that it's Monday morning. I always feel a bit rubbish on Monday morning. Of course, it's Monday. Monday morning doesn't know itself as Monday morning. You know, for somebody else who works weekends, Monday morning might be great. They might love Monday mornings. It might be the end of their working weekend. Monday morning, if it was such a thing, couldn't be great for some people and not great for others. It's, you know, so we need to start exploring how we attribute things with goodness and badness, and we see that these things don't stand alone with those qualities. It's only a relative truth or a relative existence that we loan to them or we give them. We need to become very familiar with those qualities of things, because they let us know whether we're looking in the right place or the wrong place for lasting happiness. Yeah? If we are chasing something, an idea or a thought or a material object, and we investigate it, we will find that it has the qualities of being impermanent and not inherently standing, truly by its own light. It's only standing by the goodness or badness or neutrality that we're giving it. So let me just quickly refresh on that. So if something is if there's a thing, it will be impermanent. I can't possibly derive lasting happiness from an impermanent thing. That's just ridiculous. Like if something is temporary, I can't get some lasting permanent happiness out of it. Totally illogical. So likewise, if something doesn't stand by itself, such as that sinking feeling of Monday morning, then it doesn't have any inherent goodness or badness about it. It only has that which we lend to it via our conditioning and our perceptions. And our conditioning and our perceptions can come from past history, our culture, our families, all sorts of things, exposure to that experience before. But ultimately, those conditioned perceptions aren't true. So any good or bad that we are loaning to things is also not ultimately true. It's just relative. So that's a sort of a quick explanation of the limitation of objective things and why we desire the wrong things to for our happiness. We then also explored that even if we focus in meditation on the breath, for example, or a mantra or something very subtle during the practice of meditation, we are still focusing on a thing. The breath is a thing, a mantra is a thing, a candle is a thing, a prayer is a thing. And from those things, logically, therefore, we will never actually derive lasting happiness. For sure, during our practice of meditation, we might focus on the breath for some time and the thoughts stop bouncing about. Well, our attention stops bouncing about from one thought to another. It might just settle on the breath only. And that at least can feel somewhat more relaxed and much more calm than we normally are, that's for sure. Indeed, if you even focus on it for a very, very long time, you get very good at focusing on one thing like the breath, you might find that eventually the thing almost seems to merge into the awareness of that thing. So there is an awareness of the breath, and then there is the breath. And at some point it becomes very difficult to know where the awareness ends and the breath that you're being aware of begins. So there is something to it if it's continued, but it can be a very, very long practice to get to that point. So that gives us our next clue and our next line of inquiry. We would say that there is, let me rephrase that. You might say, I am aware of my breath, or I know my breath when I'm meditating. Yeah, I am present with my breath. what we've done there is subtly put in another thing, which is the I. So we say, I am aware. And we say it all the time. I am happy. I am sad. I am angry. I'm going to the shops. I'm doing the gardening. But we never actually explore what this I is, or if there is really fundamentally an I, or is this I just another thing? The knowing that we're talking about, the awareness or the consciousness of things, like there is awareness of this pen. I know this pen, if you like, just because it's a turn of language. I can see this pen. We talk about knowing everything. If we don't know it or we're not aware of it, then effectively that thing doesn't really exist. But the knowing, the awareness or the consciousness of an object, of a thing, the knowing, the awareness has no thing-like qualities. It doesn't have the qualities that we've talked about that other things have. Awareness, if you like, or knowing, isn't temporary. If you investigate it, you are always aware. Awareness never comes and goes. You might say, oh, I wasn't aware of that 5-hour car journey earlier. I just remember leaving and arriving. That's not really true. The awareness was constantly aware, but it was probably aware of other things. It was probably aware of the podcast you were listening to, or the music, or the thoughts you were obsessing about on the journey. It just wasn't aware of the motorway because that's boring. But the awareness is always there. It's not a thing, but again we're stuck with language, so we use the word thing. But it's a thing that isn't temporary. It isn't changing. It doesn't come and go. Likewise, awareness stands alone, if you like, stands by its own light. It doesn't have any qualities projected on it. We can't project the qualities of awareness. It's just awareness. It is aware. It's just knowing. It's just conscious. We don't perceive that knowing as being good or being bad or better at sometimes and worse than others. It is always the same, whether we're 9 years old or 90 years old. We're just aware. There is just awareness. So we've explored the idea that this awareness is fundamentally exactly the same thing that has been talked about across the ages by humans as God, the Tao, the kingdom of heaven, nirvana, universal consciousness, all sorts of other things. But the reason it's given these abstract names like awareness, consciousness, God, Tao, kingdom of heaven, nirvana, is that all of those things don't have any, sorry, they're not things, but like I said, it's difficult to talk about them without using that word. We could say all of those terms, let's say terms, have no other object that they're comparable to. So we can't say, oh, like consciousness, universal. It's just a bit like an orange, or it's like a banana. It's like we can't say God. Well, before they started drawing images of God as a big sort of fat white bloke with a white beard. Their understanding of God before that was not in this sort of human form necessarily. It was like this thing that was indefinable. It was everywhere and yet it was nowhere. Same with the Tao and so on. So through history, man, or certain thinkers and explorers of the mind have always tried to come up with ways of defining the undefinable, of locating something that has no location, of talking about something that has no qualities. And they've come up with all these ways of doing it, and they've done that on purpose so that we can't in our mind specifically connect to something that we imagine it to be, because if we imagined it to be something, then we would be looking again outwards towards more things, even if they were just imagined things. So all of these terms, awareness, God, Tao, kingdom of heaven, nirvana, etc., they're all just simply ways of indicating towards this thing that we know isn't a thing in any way, that doesn't have those qualities of every other thing we are aware of, that isn't temporary, that isn't that doesn't stand only by our relative perceptions. Um, and they give it this abstract name as possible with no comparisons to differentiate it from everything else. So there is a key to all this, and the key to all this is that although we can't point directly at God, for example, or we can't point directly at awareness for all the reasons we've just spoken about, because it's not a thing and it doesn't have those thing qualities, it does let us know where not to look. So even if I can't tell you where to look, and nobody can tell you where to look, what we're doing by a process of elimination is working out where not to look, where isn't useful to explore. Like, I know pursuing the things that are my thoughts is never going to bring me happiness, because I've done that for my whole life and it's never brought me happiness that lasts. I know that the new car is never going to bring me lasting happiness, because it's temporary and it's only relatively happy for me. When I buy it, as soon as it's got a scratch on it or it breaks down, it brings me masses of unhappiness. It doesn't stand alone as itself as this thing that provides happiness. Yeah, the bar of chocolate, when I'm thinking about it and I'm really craving something sweet, in my mind there's some happiness bound up in it, and maybe when I eat it or take the first few bites there's some happiness. But if it's a huge bar of chocolate and I just keep eating it, soon enough it'll start making me feel sick, and then that bar of chocolate will be the source of my unhappiness. It never had any inherently true happiness bound up in it. That isn't correct. So we know not to look out towards these things, that's all. And we can explore each thing that arises and see if it shares those thing-like qualities. If it doesn't, then we might be onto this, the thing that isn't a thing. It's not easy to wrap your head around this stuff, because you can't get your head around this stuff. The thinking mind can't go beyond what it can think about, and it can't think about things that aren't things. It can't think about no thing, if you like. It's impossible to think about no thing. So what we tend to do in practice, which is what we're going to do now, is that we slowly start to try and let go of the things. We ease our grip on them. And really it's just a letting go of any effort. It takes effort to be connected to these things, to reach out towards them, where it takes no effort at all to fall back to our center of stillness, if you like. You can imagine it like there's a big circle. Imagine there's a big circle, yeah, and everything is going on around the edge of that circle. I don't know, noises, sounds, thoughts, things we see, distractions, yada yada yada, all around this circle. But at the center of the circle, you could say, is our awareness or our consciousness or God. It rests as this black dot at the center of the circle. And when we become fascinated by something like a thought, if you like, that awareness stretches out from its center towards the edge of the circle, towards that thing. And when it stretches out, we call that attention. It literally means stretching out towards something in Latin. And what happens normally is that we just stretch out towards one, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then another, and we keep stretching out, and it feels to us like we actually are being stretched very thinly. And it's almost like within that circle, our awareness can be a bit like a pinball machine, where the ball just bounces around from one thing to the other, all within that circle of things we are aware of. So how we normally start the practice is that we choose one thing on the edge of that circle to focus on, and we try to make sure it's a fairly stable-ish thing. That's why we often choose the breath or a mantra or something that is just fairly consistent. And although we won't find happiness by focusing on that thing, because we're still stretching out from our center point, it will at least stop us just bouncing all around the circle. And then we can slowly start to wind ourselves back in towards our center point by gradually letting go of the breath or whatever it is that we're focused on. So that's why we start still with some object, something that demands some attention. I hope that's useful. I'll guide you through a short practice now. We'll start with the breath, but if the breath makes you uncomfortable, you can always focus on something else. If you feel like the experience is unpleasant at any time, then just open your eyes, rub your hands, rub your face, whatever helps you to feel more grounded and more comfortable again. Have a cup of tea. You don't have to stay with it at all. So make sure you're comfortable. Ideally not lying down because you'll fall asleep. So sitting up, but your chair is fine if you don't want to sit on the floor. And we're just going to bring our awareness to our breath. So imagine you are at that center of the circle. The breath is out there somewhere on the periphery, and you just extend out towards it, and you notice the breath is there. Just be curious and interested in the breath, how it's moving, how it sounds, any qualities of your breathing. See if you can start to just soften any effort with the breath. Just let the breath become slower, maybe slightly more stretched out. As I said, if focusing on the breath makes you anxious, you can always focus on sensations in your body, or sound of my voice, or sounds around you and outside. But just choose one thing on the circumference of your circle to focus on. You can almost imagine yourself like a line extending out from that center point to the thing that you're focused on. And what we hopefully notice is that we're resting with that one thing. We probably notice that all of a sudden a thought becomes more fascinating, and we might bounce over to that as well. That's totally normal. That's part of being human. It's just our habit pattern. When you start to notice that, just come back to the one thing that you were focusing on. The breath, the body, the sounds, or whatever. Now, you could always pause at this point and extend this as long as you wanted if you were on your own, until you feel really settled and grounded, and that the attention isn't jumping all over the place like that pinball game. But what we're going to start doing once our attention is settled on one thing is start to move it into the spaces between things. So that's where we're going to go now. So first of all, we'll start to explore the space where there's no breath. So at the start and the end of every breath, every inhale and exhale, there's a slight pause where nothing moves. That's a space of no breath. Now we're always focused on the breath, but we're going to turn our attention away from the breath and move it to the no breath, to the stillness, to those tiny little places where the breath stops moving. Don't try to extend those spaces by your will. Just breathe completely freely and as normally as possible, and just notice those spaces. notice that the no breath frames the movement of a breath. And actually the default is to have no breath. The breath seems to be superimposed on top of that in some way. Because the breath requires some effort, some engagement. The no breath is just a stopping, it's just a being. And again, you probably likely find yourself drawn towards other things around the circle of your awareness, maybe thoughts or feelings or plans. Perfectly normal. We don't get in any way frustrated or disheartened. This is a practice after all, so we just come back to the thing that we are sticking the focus on, and this thing is now obviously becoming more subtle. You might have to come back to the actual movement of the breath at first, but soon you can come back to the more subtle space between the breaths, the stillness and quietness where there is no breath. And again, you can practice this as long as you want on your own. You could even make the breath your only focus, or the space between breaths your only focus. But I just want to move us through a few different simple techniques. So the next one that we'll explore is the silence behind sounds. So rather than focusing on the thing, the objective experience of the sound of my voice, sounds in the room, sounds outside your room, outside your house, rather than focusing on the sounds, we start to notice the silence not only between the sounds, but that there is an eternal silence underneath the sounds as well. As if the sounds are projected upon the silence, or as if they emerge out of the silence. The silence is the default setting. Sounds are just an appearance within it or on top of it. So even when there are sounds like my voice, we can still focus our attention on the silence behind those. And again, what we're doing is we're just slowly releasing our grip on the sounds, slowly letting go of the effort that it takes to hold on to the sounds. Letting go and softening or relaxing into that silence between and behind the sounds themselves. So even if you think the silence has been disrupted or interrupted by a noise or a sound, the silence is still there. There's a continuum. It's not like the silence can vanish. That's a really interesting idea. It's simply that there are sounds laid over it or imposed on top of it. So keep letting go of the objects, of the things, letting go of the sounds, coming back to the silence. And then we're going to shift our attention or our awareness one more time. And this time we're going to look for the spaces between the thoughts, behind the thoughts. You may call it space or stillness or silence or peace. But behind the activity of the thinking mind, between the interruptions of the thinking mind, there is always this stillness, space, peace. It's just that the thoughts seem so incessant and never-ending that we don't ever notice that stillness, that quietness is there. So rather than willing the thoughts to be gone, which is impossible and pointless, thoughts are just arisings like sounds and the breath. Instead of giving them the focus, we instead direct our focus upon the stillness, the space, the quietness, behind and in between the thoughts. Another way of saying this is that there is an awareness, a spacious, still, centered awareness, always present behind the thoughts, behind the sounds, behind the breathing. We're simply turning away from the objects, away from the things, letting go of the objects, letting go of the things, and relaxing or softening back into our center, into our awareness. Sometimes I think it feels like falling backwards through heavy velvet curtains or something like that. So very comforting, just sort of layers and layers of curtains as I fall back away from the edge of the circle, away from the things that surround me, back to my center where it's perfectly still and constant. Now this practice can continue as long as you want to. You can come back to it or pause the video if you're watching afterwards. But right now I'm just going to gently bring us back towards those things, back towards the world around us. So become aware of my voice again, become aware of sounds. Start to notice your breath moving in and out, your body being affected by your breath, any sensations in your body, ground underneath you or the chair or the bed or whatever you're lying or sitting on. Be aware of that again, the space around your body, the room. Maybe starting to wiggle your fingers, your toes very gently, bringing some life back, letting your breath become a little bit more active and deep. Slowly emerging out of this completely relaxed, still space that you've been inhabiting. When you're ready, just opening your eyes and seeing the objects around you again very clearly. If you feel a bit dreamy or sleepy, that can be really normal. I mean, we've totally, just removed ourselves from what we normally do, which is chasing thoughts, chasing experience, chasing sounds, chasing everything. So it can be like waking from a deep sleep. So don't worry, have a nice cup of tea, watch something on telly or read a book or whatever, just to ground yourself again. know that that's just part of the process. So I hope that was useful. I don't like to say good or bad because I don't want to turn it into another thing. But it's all an exploration, and like I said, we're not looking for a thing, we're not looking for something. We have already ascertained that things are not the source of happiness and not what we're looking for. So all we're doing is turning away from things, turning towards no thing, or awareness, or God, or whatever you want to call it. Remember, they're just all abstract terms for the same non-thing. If you've got any questions, just ping me an email. I look forward to seeing you next week, or whenever you can make it again. And thanks to all of you that have donated, however much or little that was. It's always gratefully received. So thank you for that. Look forward to seeing you again. All right, bye.